My name's Peter Bradley. I'm CEO and founder of Torsion Information Security. Thanks for taking the time to have a look at the demo of our product. We hope you'll like what you see. So the objective for this session is we're going to give you a bit of a high-level understanding of Torsion. We're not aiming in this session to give you a really deep understanding of the product and how to apply it. We're going to keep it high level in this session. That deep understanding, it will come in time. It's going to require you to be hands-on with the product and to really kind of push it around and play with it and build that deep understanding for yourself. So in the meantime today, we're just going to focus on the high level, give you a good understanding of what the product is, the problems that we solve and how it works. The session should take about an hour. So let's get into it. Now I'm going to start with just a few slides to set the scene. This is not going to be death by PowerPoint. We'll get through these slides quickly and then we'll get into the demo. So to start, the problem that we're solving with Torsion is one that if you have ever worked with SharePoint or Office 365 or other kinds of information systems like this, and we assume because you're watching this video that you have, then this is a problem that you will no doubt recognize. And this is a problem that we have come up against and seen in our careers thousands and thousands of times over the years. And that problem is that in every single one of these kinds of systems that we have ever seen, and we believe that has ever really been deployed, right? And we're talking about old file share and legacy systems right through to the modern cloud with Office 365 and Dropbox. Who has access to what? Files and information. It decays out of control over time, right? The longer these systems have been running, particularly after they've been running for about 6 months or more, who has access to what, or permissions as we sometimes call it, it just gets worse and worse and worse, right? The bottom line is that most businesses have very little visibility or control of who has access to what among enormous and constantly sprawling volumes of information and constant relentless business change. And when the business has very little control or visibility of who has access to what information, then that can lead to some very significant security and compliance challenges. Now, historically, we as an industry have tried to address this problem using some pretty standard techniques and approaches, right? So we design governance plans and processes and try to adhere to them. We train our users, we train our administrators, and sometimes we give the administrators some tools to try and help with this. Now, there's half a dozen, probably more tools that I'm referring to. I'm not gonna name them here, but I think we all know what we're talking about. These tools, they all work basically the same way, right? They present to the administrator huge, great big long lists of files and folders, document libraries, SharePoint sites, Microsoft Teams, users, groups, who's in what groups have permissions where. They can run some reports on that, they give some visibility of that, and they require the IT administrator to manually orchestrate permissions using those tools, right? To manually control who's in what group and what groups have permissions where and what the implications of those things are. Now, regardless of what we do, however, right, whether we do all of that governance planning or whether we don't, whether we deploy those tools or whether we don't, whether we train our users or whether we don't, the problem that we are trying to solve, it always still happens. Every single time it happens. Therefore, it is just a simple connection of logic that what we're doing, and these tools in particular, they don't solve the problem, they simply don't work. Now, there's a couple of reasons why those tools don't work, and these are hopefully a couple of reasons that we'll recognize. The first is that there is overwhelming volume, right? There is far too much information, far too many people, far too much business change for any kind of manual, human-driven process to ever possibly keep up. The fact is that the IT admins trying to drive these tools, they get absolutely drowned in volume. And the second problem is that IT teams, they tend to operate at arm's length from the rest of the business. Often IT is even outsourced. And as a result, the actual guys in the IT team, they don't have a close understanding of what the information is, how that information changes, the security and compliance context around the specific information, who should have access to it, how access to that information should change over time, and what are the implications if they get it wrong. The IT guys don't have that level of depth of understanding of the information itself, right? But without having that understanding, a person making decisions about who should have access to that information, if they don't have that level of understanding, then poor decisions are kind of inevitable, right? To make good decisions about who needs access to something, you really need a good understanding of what the information is. So really the only people who have that kind of detailed understanding of what the information is and the security and compliance context around it, the only people with that kind of understanding are the data owners in the business, right? And therefore, any effective solution that can honestly, effectively, and accurately keep control of who has access to information, any effective solution, it must focus on the business users, right? The role of IT, they still have a role, but their role should be technical oversight of the systems themselves, not manually controlling, orchestrating permissions at a detailed level, right? But when we say we need to focus on the business users, well, who do we mean, right? What do we mean by that? We're talking about the project managers, the account managers, the line managers in the business. And what do we know about those people? Well, first of all, they're very busy. They are absolutely not technical. And this problem that we're talking about, they are not even remotely interested in this, right? That's who we're talking about. And so that obviously makes it quite difficult to engage with them, but nonetheless, they are the people we have to engage with if we want to solve this problem. So how can we do that? Well, to engage the business users, we have to make it extraordinarily simple for them, right? If we want to get their attention and get them to engage with these questions, then we absolutely cannot require them to think. We can't require them to be proactive. We can't require them to log into a separate tool. We can't ask them to give any more than literally 2 seconds of their attention. We cannot ask them to engage with any kind of complexity whatsoever. Right? If we try to do any of those things, then they are simply going to ignore us. Right? They're just not going to engage. They're going to get on with their day and not even think about this stuff, and we end up in the same place where we haven't solved the problem. Right? So these are the parameters, the very difficult and narrow set of parameters in which we have to design our solution. So the problem that we're solving, it starts with the share buttons in the top right hand corner of most of the user experiences throughout the Microsoft stack, and indeed outside of it as well. Right? Now we're all pretty familiar with that share button, right? You click it, you get a pretty simple dialog. The user types in an email address, they press OK, that person receives access, right? It's pretty simple, and that flow happens hundreds of times a day throughout the business, right? Now, it's our position, it's our understanding of this problem that there are some critical problems with that particular user experience. It's too simple. It's too simple. There are some critical flaws, and the simplicity and the flaws in that particular process, they cause the problem that we're solving. Right? Those problems lead us into the state where permissions get out of control, creating security and compliance problems for the business. Okay, so here we have a pretty plain vanilla SharePoint Online team site. There's nothing particularly clever going on in the configuration of this site whatsoever, except obviously we have Torsion running in it. You have probably already noticed the couple of changes that Torsion has made to the user interface that you get normally completely out of the box. So security status OK is up the top there. It's also on this document library, and that one down there as well. And also the share button that we just described as being so problematic is gone, and we've replaced it instead with this button here, which we call sharing and security. Right, let's be specific. Well, there are 3 critical problems with that old sharing experience. Problem number 1. There is absolutely nothing to stop me from sharing something with somebody who should not have it. Right? I can open up that share dialog, type in an email address, and share some very sensitive information with a junior person who absolutely shouldn't have it. There is nothing in the technology to stop that from happening. Second problem. The technology makes absolutely zero attempt to capture the business reason why I am sharing something. Right? You simply type in an email address, press enter, off it goes. That's it. The tech doesn't try to understand why I'm doing it in terms of the business reasons why. Now, why does that matter? Well, if we don't know why somebody has access to something, it is fundamentally impossible for us to validate if they should have access to something. Right? Well, we can use all kinds of tools and scripts and whatnot to run out a report containing the list of 50 people's names who have access to the marketing SharePoint site. That's not interesting. But the list of 50 names, that's not the use case. Right? That's just a list of names. It doesn't really add any value. The use case is, who is the one person out of 50 who should not be there? Who is the one person who, out of those 50 names, the fact that they have access to this site or this information represents a risk to the business? How do you spot that one person? That's the use case, right? That's where the value is. That's what we're actually trying to achieve. Now, if we don't know why people have access to stuff, why those 50 people are actually on that list, if we don't know why, then how can we spot the one person that shouldn't be there, right? We can't do it. However, if we do know why they have access, then we can test those reasons against our knowledge of reality and look for the reasons that aren't true. So for example, if we know that Mary has access to this site because she's covering for Jane while Jane is on maternity leave, if we knew that, then we could see that reason, we could look over our shoulder, we could see, well no, Mary got back from maternity leave last week. Therefore, the reason that Jane has access is not true, therefore Jane's access is not appropriate, and we've just spotted the one person that shouldn't be there and we can do something to pull them out. Right? If we know that, then we can do something about it. But if we don't know, then we're at a loss, right? We can't actually get proactive and spot the problem. Now, there's a compliance angle on that exact same story that I just told you. So let's imagine now that there is an auditor sitting next to you. You're being audited against one of the InfoSec security regulations or standards or internal policies. And the question most of the time with those kinds of audits is, prove to me that the business is in control of who has access to this important information, and as a result of that process working well, then the list is correct and appropriate. Now, how are you going to prove that? How are you going to prove something like that the business is actually in control of who has access to this? Well, if you don't know why people have access, you cannot verify, you cannot validate that they should. But if you do know every single one of those people, you not only know the fact that they have access, but you know why, then with the auditor, you can go through those reasons one by one and demonstrate that the reasons are true. Therefore, the access is correct and appropriate. Therefore, the business is in control, and you've just gotten through that compliance and that audit scenario, right? But if you don't know why people have access, it is impossible to validate if they should. Third problem with the old share user experience is that the technology makes no attempt to circle back and revoke access sometime down the line when something changes and it's no longer appropriate, right? I can share a site with a person, they receive access, and that's just it, right? The access just kind of accumulates. But if that person changes roles, or something changes about what they're working on, or indeed something changes about the security or compliance context of the information itself, maybe we're talking about an RFP process where when we were drafting it, the information wasn't really sensitive, we didn't care too much who had access to it, but after our RFP got accepted and we went into contract negotiations, well now actually that RFP has become more sensitive, right? And so who has access to it is now something that we need to worry about more. These kinds of things happen all the time. Business change happens all the time. But the technology makes no attempt to detect that business change and revoke access that's no longer appropriate. The access just simply persists, which means that overall, people just accumulate access to more and more stuff over time. These problems put together, plus the fact that everything we've ever tried in the past doesn't really work, these problems put together, they lead us into the state that we see every single time, which is where the business is not in control and has basically no visibility of who has access to what, creating the security and compliance challenges that we're looking to deal with. So, Torsion. Torsion is a software engine running in the Microsoft Azure cloud or some software running in your data center. We create a secure, we create a tenancy for you in the cloud version. That tenancy is isolated and cryptographically secured just for you. We then establish a secure connection from your Torsion tenancy to your Office 365 tenancy, and indeed to any other information systems that you want Torsion to work with, both in the cloud or on premises. We then consume the APIs of those systems, and in so doing, we build up a real-time index of every single file, every single folder, SharePoint site, Microsoft team, every single user, every single domain group, every single instance of a person having access to something, and every single instance of a person actually accessing something, right? We watch and monitor absolutely everything that is going on in your information systems, and we build a big real-time index of all of it. Now, once that index is built, we then analyze it and mine it constantly in massive, constant, relentless detail, looking for insights. Right? There are dozens, soon to be literally hundreds of different ways that we are analyzing and mining that data, tearing it apart, looking for things that we can do with it. The kinds of algorithms that we're talking about, I mean, some are fairly logical algorithmic, some are based on timers, many are based on machine learning. There are a lot of different ways that we're tearing that information apart, looking for value in it. Now, one point that we will note is that we cannot see inside your data. We don't see inside your data. We do not see inside your files. We absolutely don't keep a copy of any of your files or any of your information whatsoever. In our index, it's just a big sea of pointers, right? So if you have a file, then the index will contain a row in the database which will point to that file. It might contain the address of the file. We will see metadata about that file, things like file name, created by, modified by, but that is all. We absolutely categorically do not look inside your data, nor are we able to, and we don't want to. That is not what Torsion does. So when we hit that button, we invoke the Torsion user interface. Now, the first thing that I'll draw your attention to here is that this is so natively integrated and embedded inside of the host application that your average business user is actually going to have no idea that they've just invoked a separate tool, right? It looks like it's part of SharePoint, and that's absolutely critical for getting proper engagement out of business users, right? If we required them to log into a separate application, we've already put too many hurdles in the way of many of our users. So it looks like it's part of SharePoint, and that is absolutely important to how this works. Now, to do a bit of a run around the block of some of the things we can see here. So first of all, this site is shared with 13 people, right? Straight away, that's a bit of a sense check, right? So if you're the head of marketing, this site is shared with 13 people, and you can stop and go, hold on a second, there's only 3 people who work for me. Why are there 13 people who have access, right? So now you've spotted a potential problem, and you can engage with it and follow it up and do something about it. Now, also, as the technical people watching this video will know, that's not the easiest thing in the world to figure out, right? It's complicated. You've got domain groups, nested domain groups, dynamic domain groups. You can have dynamic domain groups inside of regular domain groups, which are inside of SharePoint groups that have site collection admin access, right? There are lots of complicated, overlapping, intersecting, difficult to understand ways of somebody actually getting access to something through this technology. So what we've done with Torsion is we've unpicked all of that. We will recurse through all the domain groups, we'll figure it all out, and we can tell you that there are 13 unique people who have access to this site. The next thing is the business owner. Right? So Torsion is fundamentally a data governance tool, right? Data access governance. And a fundamental pillar of any governance plan is understanding who in the business owns what. Who in the business is responsible for what information. Now, if the business already knows who owns this site and who owns everything else, then that's fine. We can obviously configure that in here. But oftentimes the business doesn't know, right? Or its knowledge is patchy, inaccurate, has gaps, and so forth. Right? Often the knowledge of who owns what is incomplete at best. Now, historically, what have we as an industry always done in face of that problem? Well, we would usually run a consulting exercise where we would create a big list of everything. We would get people around a table in a workshop and say who owns this and who owns that, or we would create some forms and send them out to the business and collect the responses, and then theoretically we should repeat that exercise every few months because it changes over time, right? We could do that. But with Torsion, we've found a better way. So obviously, no customer in the world enjoys paying for an exercise like that. No consultant in the world enjoys running an exercise like that. So we've found a better way. Torsion can figure it out automatically. Who owns this site? Who owns everything? We can figure that out automatically. So all of that data mining and analysis that I mentioned before, this is one of the things that we're analyzing and mining to try and figure out. So for example, we might look at, well, who is the most active user in this site? Who is most often creating, reading, uploading stuff? Who is their manager? When are they logging on? What devices are they logging on? What locations are they accessing this system? What are the different patterns of user engagement and behavior and everything that's going on in this site? We might look at all of that and make a best guess determination that Adele, we think she might be the owner of the marketing site. So the next thing we will do is we'll send Adele a quick notification. We think you might be the owner of the marketing site. Do you accept the nomination, yes or no? If she says yes, she becomes the owner. If she says no, we go to the next person down the list. If she is the owner and then 3 months later we see something's changed, maybe she changes her role or her access patterns or something changes about Adele, we can see that too. And then we might send her another quick notification. Adele, we think you may no longer be the owner of the marketing site. Is that correct? And then she can say, oh yeah, you're right. Actually, I'm not the owner of this anymore. We will then clear out her ownership of it and the process begins again. Right, so we're now automatically completing and maintaining our knowledge of who owns everything. And that's very important because we want to put the data owner in the business in the driving seat when it comes to making decisions about who needs access to the information that they're responsible for. The next thing we see here, security status OK. Now you might have seen, so that's there, it's also at the top there, it's also on the banner behind. So again, that analysis and data mining that we're constantly doing, looking at absolutely everything that is going on in this site and in the information system, we are tearing it apart, analyzing it, looking for problems, looking for potential security vulnerabilities, looking for the needles in a haystack where a person has access to a file or a site or a folder and it doesn't look right. Right? It looks like it could possibly be problematic. It just doesn't look like it's possibly okay, or it violates policy. Now there are literally dozens, soon hundreds of different algorithms and different approaches that we're looking at, that we're using to try and find these problems, these needles in the haystack. Now, to give you an example, there's one approach which we call the 9 in 10. Right, so let's suppose you have a folder. It contains a whole bunch of files which DLP has labeled as finance files. We can see that there are 10 people who have access to that folder. We know who those 10 people are. We know things about them. We know that 9 out of 10 of those people who have access to the finance folder work in the finance team. So they look pretty much okay. But 1 out of the 10 people who have access to that folder, he works in marketing. He's a junior in the marketing department who has access to a folder that contains a bunch of finance files. That looks like an outlier, right? It looks like it could be a mistake. How he got access doesn't matter, right? Maybe he used to work in finance and now he's moved. Maybe an administrator accidentally put him in the wrong domain group, or maybe something else has changed. It doesn't matter how he got access. The fact is, he now has access and it looks like it might be wrong. Right? It could be a mistake, could be malicious, could be any kind of problem. So we'll spot something like that. Right? It's an example of a security vulnerability or a security issue that we will spot. And then what do we do about it? Right? The next thing we need is a little bit of human validation that that problem is really a problem. Right? So, I mean, there could be a perfectly valid reason why that marketing guy has access to the finance folder. We just need a little bit of human validation to say that actually, no, it's fine, or you're right, that shouldn't be there, do something about it. So who do we tell? The business owner, the data owner in the business. They are the person who is best placed to understand what the information is, who is best placed to say that person should have access or no, they shouldn't, who is best placed to say that is a problem or no, it's not. So we'll send them a quick notification, and they'll have the very quick opportunity to take a one glance at the problem itself and tell us whether it's a problem. The interface, which I'll show to you in a moment, that we give to them is very, very simple. It is literally two big buttons: fix it or ignore it. That's it, right? When we talk about we can't engage business owners for more than 2 seconds, well, this is what we're talking about, right? Most of their interactions is just going to be, here's a problem, is it a problem, yes or no? And then we're out of the way, right? There is nothing more that we require of the business owner day to day, because we're doing everything automatically and proactively. We don't need the business owner to be constantly engaged with this stuff. Now, security status okay, that simply means that there are no outstanding security problems going on in this site right now. If we had spotted a problem, but we have yet to get that human validation that the problem is a problem, the problem hasn't yet been addressed, then the security status would show something different. And in fact, let me just show you what that looks like. So here's another site that actually has some problems going on. We can see the security status is critical on this site. It's also on this library. Also, this library has some problems. This folder has a problem. So there's a bunch of problems that are going on throughout this second site, which we'll come back to. Next, not shared outside the organization. So this is not, is external sharing turned on or off in the tenant or the site collection? This is, there are 13 people who have access to this site. We know who those people are. We know things about those people. One of the things that we know is, are they an external person, yes or no? If at least one person who has access to this information is an external person, we show this as a bright orange flag, otherwise we show it grey. The next thing, security classification. So I'm going to show you how this works in the next section of the demo, but just for now, I'd like you to understand one important thing. Torsion security classifications do not compete with, overlap, or in any way undermine the classification labels that you get in Office 365 or in AIP, MIP. Right? Those classification labels, the way that those ones work is that they are applied to files. Right? That's how they work. They are labels that are applied to an individual file. You have a spreadsheet, it contains a credit card number, you upload it, the technology spots that credit card number, labels the file as finance, and then can apply some business rules by virtue of that label. That's basically how it works. That's DLP. Now, what Torsion classification labels do is our classification labels are only applied to the containers where information lives. We can classify with Torsion a SharePoint site, a Microsoft team, a document library, or a folder, but we stop there. We do not go down to the next level and classify files, and that is a very, very deliberate thing. Our classification labels, our security classifications are mostly about governance policy, right? We can attach quite a rigorous governance policy which contains the rules and the boundaries for what kind of information, what kind of access, what kind of sharing, what kind of user behavior is okay or not inside of that container, right? Inside of that SharePoint site or inside of that document library or that Microsoft team, right? And so, when the classifications are then applied to the site or to the library, then we will enforce the governance policy that is attached to the classification within that container. So, and also the way that we work with the DLP type labels is that they can actually make that policy more powerful, right? So this is where we can actually say that, for example, this is a marketing site, you're not allowed to upload a finance file here, right? It would be DLP that would discover that a file is a finance file, and it would be Torsion to say, well, that file is not allowed here, right? Because to upload sensitive finance information to a marketing site would mean that finance information is being exposed to people that shouldn't have it. So we can spot that kind of security issue that's created when you have the right file in the wrong place. Okay, so there are 13 people who have access to this site. We know who they are. Here they are. Now, notice how none of the things in this list are a domain group or a SharePoint group. We unpick all of that. We will unravel all of the complicated domain groups, even if they're dynamic domain groups, doesn't matter, we'll figure all of that out. We can tell you not what are the groups that have access, but who are the people, right? That's actually what matters. Who are the people who have access? Now, anytime that anybody ever has access to anything, when Torsion is running in your system, we can always tell you this kind of thing. Right? So access was granted for this person to this resource with this permission level using this mechanism, was granted by this person at this time. Right? Because Torsion is plugged into everything that's going on in the system, we see this kind of thing, right? When somebody shares something, we know that it happened, and we can capture the date and timestamp on that. And so now we can surface that information here. You'll notice also there's a run report button up the top there. So all of this kind of information, there is reporting baked right throughout the Torsion tool. You can run reports on any information resource. So this is a SharePoint site. We could run that report instantly on the site, or a library, or on a folder, or on a file, or on a team. We can run those reports instantaneously against any information resource. And the kinds of things that are in that report are, what's the security and compliance context around the information, who has access to it, who has accessed it in the last X days, the security configurations, all of that kind of stuff is always encapsulated in those reports. Now, the next thing that I'll draw your attention to is this third column here, reason for access. Right, so remember I was talking about this in the slides earlier, is that if we want to validate if we want to validate whether somebody should have access to something, we need to know why they have access, right? And if we do not know why somebody has access, we cannot validate if they should. Well, so Torsion is capturing that reason for access. Anytime that anybody ever has access to anything, we are not only capturing who they are and who gave it to them and what permission level, but we are also capturing the business reason why they have it. And when we capture that, it's not just something that gets tucked away in a report or in a log. We're actually making it prominent, right? It's the third column in this table. It's very visible. And this is not only visible to IT and to the business owners, this is actually made visible to every single person who has access to the marketing side. And that's quite important, right? Because what we're trying to do is to help people spot when a reason isn't true, and therefore the access is not appropriate and should be revoked. So, all it takes, the example that we talked about before, Mary has access because she's covering for Jane while Jane's on maternity leave. Well, all it takes is for the person who sits next to Jane to look over their shoulder and say, well, she got back already. She's back last week. Therefore, the reason that Mary has access is not true. Therefore, Mary's access is inappropriate and we can pull it out. We want to empower every single person in the business to help make those identifications, to spot those scenarios, and as soon as somebody has spotted it, then we can do something about it, right? So we want to make it visible to everybody. Now, how do we capture those reasons, right? Well, there are a few different ways, and let me show you a couple of them. So the first thing that we can do when we want to share this site, let's go, I want to share this site with Brad, right? So you can pick him there, and here's the first thing, please add a reason now. So Torsion is saying, yeah, it's fine, you can share this site with Brad, but just tell me why, right? Tell us why you're doing it. Now, whether that reason is optional or mandatory, that's configurable. That's actually configurable based on the classification of the information as well, or you can do a system-wide config of this. Now, what you didn't see just then is the system actually just ran a sense check on the idea of Brad receiving access. Right? He hasn't received it yet, but we just sense checked the idea of him receiving it. Now he passed the test, which is why we got this far, but let me just show you what happens. I'm going to come over to another site and show you what happens when somebody fails the test. So here, this is a finance site, and I'm going to attempt to share this site with this user, Abigail. Now, Abigail's a web developer, and we're trying to give her access to a finance site. Already that doesn't sound right, does it? I mean, that sounds like it could be problematic. Could be okay, but anyway, we'll try it, and there, Torsion's just picked it up. She's failed the sense check. This person cannot be granted access to this site because it would violate the rules, right? The OK button is grayed out, right? She cannot receive access to this. We've blocked it. So this is the kind of thing that we can do now to actually prevent inappropriate access from ever happening in the first place. So back to Brad. Please add a reason now here. So here's how we can answer that question, right? Here's how we can give that reason. So one of the ways that we can do it, we can give him temporary access for a day, a week, a month, that's fine. We'll obviously revoke that access automatically when it's no longer required. Specify the reason here. So pick a reason. Now, the options in this drop-down, these are configurable as well. Lots and lots of the way that Torsion works is configurable according to how the company wants their data governance to work. So here we can say he's giving access for maternity cover, or we can indeed type it in here, maternity cover for Jane. So now we've captured that. Save that. Okay. So now we can see the reason for access has been filled in there. He's got temporary access, and there's the reason. And that reason for access is made visible to all of the other people who have access to the site. So, okay, that's a good start. Now, we think we've got to get a bit more clever than that. So here's another way that we can answer the question. Why does Brad need access? Well, perhaps he just needs access as part of his current position, right? Well, this is Brad's current position. He is in the internal comms department. He's currently working on 2 account assignments, LRT and new rights. He is an administrative manager. He's based in Oxford. So maybe the reason that Brad needs access to this information is because he's an admin manager in internal comms. So see, as I was hitting those checkboxes there, this reason down the bottom was building up automatically. Right, so okay, there's a reason. We can see who are the other people in the business who also meet this combination of criteria. You can see, oh yeah, you're right, Sophia, good idea, we should give her access as well for the same reason. And there we are. So we're now sharing it with both of them and for the same reason. Now, these are obviously user attributes, right? And these are attributes which describe the users. Now, where do we get that attribute data is a question usually comes up at this point, so let me answer it for you. The answer is we'll get it from wherever we need to get it from. And so if the business is storing that information in Active Directory, we can get it from there. If it's in SAP, we can get it from there. If it's in a SQL database, we can get it from there. If it's in a spreadsheet, we can get it from there. And by the way, the role title doesn't have to come from the same data source as the department, for example, or the account assignments. They can come from different places. There are a whole range of integration options which will allow us to reach out and retrieve this data and maintain our knowledge of it automatically. So we don't generally require the business to do change their own business processes for wherever this information is maintained. We can reach in and get it from wherever it lives. Now, so Brad currently has access because he's in internal comms and he's an administrative manager. That means that when Brad moves from internal comms to the marketing team, let's say, we can see that change, right? We see that he has just moved. And so what that means is that we have now automatically detected that the reason that Brad has access is no longer true. Therefore, his access is now inappropriate and needs to be pulled out. So that's what we're going to do. However, what we are not going to do is switch his access off like a light switch, right? One of the things that we have learned on our journey is that businesses are not quite as simple as that, right? When somebody changes roles, there are handover periods. There are complicated little grey areas where people kind of have 2 jobs for a while. Or if somebody goes on holiday, someone else covers for them. Now they sort of have 2 jobs for a while, right? It's complicated. It is not quite as clean and crisp and clear as we would like it to be. Now, if we did just shut his access off like a light switch, then we would actually be slowing the business down. We would actually be undermining that handover period and making things harder. We wouldn't be improving things. We would actually be doing the opposite. So what we do instead is decay his access gradually over time. When we see that Brad has moved from internal comms to marketing, we will send both him and the data owner, Adele, a quick notification. We've just noticed that the reason that Brad has access to the marketing side is no longer true, so we're going to begin to revoke it. And what we will do is we will leave his access untouched for, let's say, a week, and then switch it to read-only for a week, and then to suspended for a week, and then we'll pull it out. And during that whole gradual decay cycle, he still has enough access to the information to do his handover, so we're now not compromising that. But also during that decay, both Brad and the data owner, Adele, can intervene if they need to. They can click a button and say, no, wait, Brad still needs access to that. And that's fine. We'll leave his access in place, we'll update the reason for access, and everything carries on. But in the do-nothing scenario, when neither Brad nor Adele intervenes, then his access will decay gradually down to 0. And most importantly, in that entire story that I just told, at no point was a centralized IT team required to orchestrate anything. IT doesn't need to get involved at this really quite low level of detail. When we're talking about one person has access to one site, we're very granular in the conversation that we're having, and that's really not where IT needs to be spending their time. And as we've talked about, that they're not very well placed to do the job well, even if they want to. So here we are engaging with the business to maintain access, but we're doing it in a way that is completely automated and unobtrusive for everybody. Now, here's another way that we can answer this question about why do people need access. Well, ever since really the dawn of time with all of this kind of technology, there's always been two fundamental ways that somebody can have access to something, right? We can share with a person or we can share with a group. A group is really just a list of names, which is usually maintained centrally using Active Directory or that kind of technology. Now, that's the way it's always worked. With Torsion, we are adding a brand new third way. We're not sharing, we don't have to share with a person, we don't have to share with a group, we can share with a reason. Share with the reason why a person needs access to something, and then let Torsion automatically figure out the who. And we call this a security rule. So this is how this works. So give access to the people who work in the role of branch manager or business manager, and in the desktop or HR department, and who are currently assigned to the LRT or New Rights account, who are currently based in Fremont. Right, so notice as I was hitting these checkboxes here, the business rule, the security rule, was building itself up automatically, right? Now this is quite important. The user interface here is pretty simple, right? It's easy to use, it's easy to understand. It's so easy, in fact, that we can give it to a business user. This is not an IT thing, right? This is not an IT tool. It's a tool that has been made so simple that we can legitimately give it to a business user, and they probably don't even need much training, or even any training. It's that simple, it's that intuitive that we can legitimately give it to them. So we can do a quick sense check here. View rule members. Okay, so there's no people meeting this combination of criteria, or I've obviously made it a little too complex. Let me just simplify that back down. Let's say I'm going to give access to anyone who's in desktop or HR. And there we go. Okay, so there's 20 people who meet that combination of criteria right now, and here they are. So that's a bit of a sense check for the business user, right? Honestly, well, recognizing, of course, that this is a moving target, right? People move around, they change roles, things change all the time. But this is still a useful sense check. Who meets this combination of criteria right now? So that's fine. Okay, I can hit add rule. There's the rule there. Let's say anybody meeting that criteria, they're going to get read and write access, save it, and that's done. Torsion will now automatically maintain who has access to this site according to that rule, and nobody's going to have to do anything. Now, you might recognize this basic idea. This is a spin on the idea of what's called attribute-based access control. It's kind of the big brother of the smaller concept, which is role-based access control. But the two have a lot in common. But this is different in two very important ways. And the difference here, we believe, is the difference between this actually working in the business versus kind of not. And the first reason is this user interface, right? It's so simple that this can now legitimately be given to the business, right? As opposed to the dynamic domain groups, for example, that you get in some subscriptions of Azure AD. You create a dynamic domain group using PowerShell, right? That is a 100% IT thing. That is not a business thing. It's an IT thing, right? And as we've talked about before, to get the right decisions made about who needs access to information, we need to move those decisions much closer to the business. And so giving them this kind of user interface that empowers the business to actually take control of this stuff, that's very, very important. And the second reason is that whole access to K thing. It's what we do when somebody moves out of a rule. How do we respond to that? If we just turn their access off like a light switch, then we're going to undermine the kinds of handover periods and grey fluid things that happen in the business every day. We're going to undermine those, which means we're going to slow the business down, which means we're actually going to create more problems than we solve. Right? So that access to K thing, where we will see that somebody has moved out of a rule, we will send them and the data owner a notification, give them the opportunity to intervene and gradually decay their access down to zero, rather than turning it off like a light switch. That is absolutely crucial when it comes to actually making this work in the business. And so we do that here as well. Okay. Now, the next thing that I will draw your attention to before we move on to the next site, I just want to make clear that Torsion is not just a SharePoint play, right? So obviously Microsoft Teams is pretty much everywhere right now, and that's a very good thing. It's a very good tool. Well, here's Torsion running in Teams, right? So here we are here. So all of the same capability that we just talked about in SharePoint, we absolutely get it in Teams as well. We add a sharing security tab into every team, and all of the same things that we're discussing here. Security classifications, see who has access, rules-based security, rules-based sharing, the issue detection that will come on next, all the reporting, all of the auditing, all of everything that we're talking about is absolutely applicable inside of Teams, just as well as it is inside of SharePoint. Very soon we'll also be connecting this into Windows on-premise based file shares and cloud-based file shares as well. So this exact same user interface will be injected as a right-click into Windows Explorer, and into many, many other systems as well. We're responding quite rapidly to customer requests to integrate this with everything from Exchange share folders to Jira to Google Drive and Dropbox and Salesforce, and very soon we will be integrating with all of them. Now, the next thing that I will show you is I'm going to come back to this finance side here. Now, we saw earlier that the security status here is critical. So we've detected a problem in the site, in this library, in this folder. We can also see that there's a classification applied to this particular site. So we've classified this site as finance sensitive. Remember we said earlier that classifications are only applied to the containers with Torsion, and we let DLP type tools classify the individual files. Then we work with those DLP file-based classifications to make the classifications on the containers more powerful. So you can see the site is a container that's been classified there. This folder has been classified. This library, this library. Here's a folder that actually has a different classification in the same document library, right? So remembering that classifications are mostly about governance policy, that means we can have a different governance policy applied to this folder as we do to this one, even though that's two folders in the same document library. That could say, for example, external sharing is okay in the marketing budgets folder, but not in the sales forecast folder. For example, or we can create a blacklist or a whitelist. Who is allowed to have access to this stuff, but not this stuff, even though it's in the same document library. So we have a lot of flexibility here. You can see also there's a problem with this particular file, right? There is a warning. There's a potential security issue that's been detected with this file, and so we've overlaid that particular problem here. Now notice how the amendments that we're making to the user interface, they're not obtrusive, right? They're not really going to slow anybody down, but they are going to empower people, right? So as an end user, if you see this, the security status is critical, well, all end users can see that. What are you going to do with that information, right? Let's say you're just a regular punter, you work in the finance team, you come into this site, you're about to upload a file that contains sensitive information. You come here, you see, well, the security status of the site is critical. There's something wrong in this site. The site has been compromised in some way. What do you do with that information? Or perhaps you don't upload that file, right? You know that if you upload it there, it's going to join all the other compromised information. So maybe we don't upload it. We'll just hold off. We'll check back again tomorrow. Hopefully the issue has been resolved, the status is returned to normal, and then you upload that. Right now, I mean, that's what have we just achieved in there? We've just prevented a potential security breach. That sensitive information in that file he was about to upload, he didn't share it. He held off until the issue could be resolved, and that information is not being put at risk when otherwise it could have been. Just to make clear, this is not just about the classic UI in SharePoint. Here we are in Modern as well. So all of the same things that we're showing you in the classic UI absolutely apply in Modern as well. Just want to make that clear. So the classification that we've applied to this site. So here the classification applied is called finance sensitive. Centrally, we're in control of the set of classifications. What's the title? What's the description? The color, the icon. If there is DLP type technology running in the estate, then we would usually synchronize the set of classifications available for the containers through Torsion with the set of classifications available for the files through DLP. It will almost always make sense to synchronize the two of those. But as I mentioned, our classifications are mostly about governance policy, right? They're about setting rules and boundaries for what kind of information, what kind of user behavior, what kinds of access are okay or not inside of these containers. They're also about nudging user behavior into directions that are cognizant of the security and compliance implications of the information. So, here we might choose to set this description, for example, which is coming up here as well, to something that makes sense in terms of guiding our users to engage with the information properly. We're absolutely doing that as well. But in terms of the governance policy, well, here's some of the things about that policy. So, for one, we're going to assume that all the information in the site is highly sensitive. Information may not be shared outside the organization. Right? So, external sharing of this kind of information is not okay. Information has no individual sharing restrictions. So this is a blacklist or a whitelist type of policy, where we can create rules which describe sets of people, or indeed we can use a list of people to say, these people absolutely may not receive access to this kind of information, or conversely, only these people may ever receive access to this kind of information, right? And that's attached to the classification, and then the classification can be applied all throughout the estate, right? So we can start to pick up instances where people have access to things that they shouldn't have, and prevent sharing, prevent people from getting access to things that they shouldn't have. And again, the mechanism by which they receive access to something doesn't matter, right? You could have something shared with you and you shouldn't have it. Perhaps that sharing happened through an interface that we can't control, like the SharePoint iPhone app, for example. Somebody receives access, or an administrator put them in the wrong group, or they used to have they had access and it was okay, but now they've changed roles and it's no longer okay. We're picking up all of that kind of stuff. Ultimately, we can just see this person has access to something, they shouldn't have it, and we can flag that up and do something about it. Information may not define its own security configuration. So if you've ever tried to be the administrator of a SharePoint system, then you're no doubt familiar with the eternal challenges of broken permissions inheritance, where somebody shares a file, all of a sudden that file now has a different permissions configuration to the folder that it's in. At scale, this problem is one of the absolute banes of the life of SharePoint admins world over. So here we're saying, well, broken permissions inheritance is not okay for any kind of information that has this classification. Information may not include certain restricted contents. So this is where we're going to work with the DLP technology that might also be running in the estate to say, well, this is a finance site, but that's a marketing file. Right? It's DLP that will tag the file as marketing. We will see that DLP label as a piece of metadata which describes the file and say, well, that file is not okay here. That file is not allowed here, and restricting restricting the permission for that file to exist here is part of the governance policy. So jumping back into our sharing security as well, so you can see the different classifications that are available. These are obviously always configurable. They are within the control of the administrators using the Torsion admin console, which we'll come on to next. So you can create these different classifications. With each of them, we can see what are the different aspects of the data policy, the governance policy that's attached to that classification. We can choose that here. We'll also suggest classifications. If, for example, DLP has tagged hundreds of files in a site as the finance label, we can then make the leap to say, okay, we're pretty sure that this site should be classified as finance, and we'll suggest to the data owner that it should be. But ultimately, it's on the data owner to choose the right classification for their information. Now, security status critical. So this comes on to one of the centerpieces of what Torsion is the issue detection, right? Where we are constantly analyzing, mining the index of information about the information, if that makes sense, and looking for security problems. And we found a bunch of them here, so the status is critical. Now, when we spot problems, what we need is a little bit of human verification that a problem is actually a problem, and the person we want to get that verification from is the data owner in the business. We can also get that verification from the IT guys. So all of the security issues that Torsion will detect, we can also see them here. Right, so this is the Torsion admin console. I'll come on to this in more detail soon. But all of the security issues that we're finding, they're also consolidated here, and the IT guys can follow them up as well. Ultimately, we just need one party to tell us that a problem is a problem, and that there's really three parties that could possibly tell us. It could be the data owner in the business, could be the IT team using the Torsion admin console, or if a partner is working with the customer to wrap Torsion in a managed service, which is very often the case, then the managed service team can also see the problems coming through and address them. So whomever is the first of those three parties to tell us if a problem is a problem, that's all we need, and then we'll go away and fix it. But in addition to showing those notifications about security problems, we can also see them consolidated here. So let's just have a look at what we have. So first of all, there's a file here. It's called "This is a confidential document, has been classified as confidential." But there's something in the security classification, in the policy, that says that confidential information is not okay here. So we've got this file, it does belong in the system somewhere, but it does not belong here. And the fact that it's here could represent a security risk to that information. So we've picked that up here. The next thing, there's a user here, Gabriel, has access to a document library, but he's not allowed to have access. So there's something about Gabriel's profile that means he is not allowed to have access to that document library, but he still does. So how he got access, again, doesn't matter. Right? Maybe he used to work in finance, now he's moved. Maybe someone shared it with him by mistake. Maybe an administrator put him in the wrong domain group. How he got access doesn't matter. The fact is, he has access, and it's not okay. We've picked that up, and we've flagged it here. The third thing, there's a file, 200 garlic, doesn't inherit its security configuration. This is broken permissions inheritance. We saw that was in the classification earlier in the governance policy, that we have disallowed broken permissions inheritance for any information estate-wide that has the finance sensitive classification. So here's what we do about it, is we will send a quick notification to the data owner in the business. There is a problem. We've just detected a problem with the information that you are responsible for. Click here to take a look. Now, when they click that notification, this is the experience they get, right? This is that 2-second or less. This is actually the user experience that's going to be invoked far more often than anything else in Torsion, is this address issue user experience. So here we can see a little bit of information about the issue. So we've decided that this is a warning severity. We make that determination automatically based on a bunch of different things: the age of the issue, how many people have access to the file, how sensitive the file is. We're making this determination automatically. We've decided that this one's a warning. The classification involved, finance sensitive, the file involved, a bit of a description of the issue. There's a why are we asking here as well, so a bit of background on how the problem's happened and what you could possibly do about it. But ultimately, all we want to ask of the business user is this: fix it or ignore it. That's it, right? We do not ask of them any more than that, and they can genuinely, honestly do this in 2 seconds or less. All they have to do is click one of those buttons. Right? So if they hit ignore it, that's fine. That's the data owner. That's the data owner telling us that this problem is not a problem. Right? I know that this file has broken permissions inheritance, but that's okay. Right? I'm signing off on this. So they can hit ignore issue. In response to that, Torsion will remove the issue, set the security status back to OK. We'll mark this problem as not a problem. The fact that they've done that will still absolutely go in all of the logs, all of the audit reports. We can see that this issue was detected at this time, flagged at this time, and they told us to ignore it at this time. Right? That is absolutely there, and it's visible. It's captured in the logs forever. But most of the time, probably 9 times out of 10, they're going to hit fix issue. Right? These are business users. They are busy. They're not really keen to engage with this kind of stuff, and probably already this is more information than they care about. 9 times out of 10, they're just going to hit fix issue, right? And that's it, right? And so then Torsion will go away and fix whatever the problem was. The way we do that obviously depends on what the problem was to begin with, right? So this was broken permissions inheritance. So what have we done? We've re-established permissions inheritance on that file. If this was a person has access and then they shouldn't, we will revoke their access. Right, so the way we fix the issue depends on what the issue was. But the point is, we have just fixed the problem. Right, the issue has been removed from the list, and that policy violation has been corrected. So you can see how hundreds, thousands of those little issue detected, flag them to the issue, fix it, ignore it, issue resolved. Thousands that happening thousands of times a month across the organization. All those little user interactions, they kind of knit together, right? They kind of add up and work together as a whole to ultimately help the business move to the place where the problem that we're trying to solve has genuinely been solved, that the business now has perfect visibility of who has access to what and perfect control of who has access to what. And thereby offsetting the security and compliance challenges that arise when those things are indeed not the case. Okay, now just to complete the demo, let's take a bit of a look at the administration console. So this is used by IT admins, and as we mentioned before, oftentimes a partner will choose with the client to wrap Torsion in a managed service. So then the managed service team will also be working in here on behalf of the client. So there's a few things going on here. So all the latest administration tasks, so the different security issues we've spotted, if there are any other governance problems or problems with users or problems anywhere, then all of those problems are consolidated here, and this is a list of all of the tasks for the administrator. In terms of the security issues, so these are all of the different security issues that we are detecting across the entire organization. Right? Every time we spot a problem, it also gets put here. And the administrators can address issues directly from here. So they can see some details of the problem, view the history, they can address it right there. Some kinds of problems are a little more involved and can't be fixed automatically by the tool, and they do require an administrator to come in and take a look. So for example, we will never manipulate the membership of an AD group that Torsion doesn't directly own, for example, because of course AD groups are used for things more than just controlling access in Office 365. So we don't want to step outside our bounds in that regard. So in that particular case, we will create a task for an administrator if they need to go and review the membership of an AD group. And all of these things are consolidated here. I'll come back to governance. We can look across our entire information estate as well. So all of the same capabilities that we saw earlier, here's the finance site that we were looking at, for example, all of the same capabilities that are pushed down towards a business user and injected into the host user interface, they're also available here. Right, so an administrator can do all of the same stuff, and they can do it centrally. So they can look at the exact same functionality here. In this case, for the finance secure document library, what's the classification? What are the issues involved? We saw this issue earlier, and it was just on this library, for example. So we can see all of that same kind of stuff there. Run reports, do it centrally, see what's changed. All of that kind of stuff is absolutely available to administrators centrally as well. Next thing, so these are what we call our platform connections. This is the connection that is established between the Torsion tenancy running in the cloud and the information systems where the business is managing its information. So here we've got a secure connection to this Office 365 tenant. Creating this connection is very, very quick. A matter of a few seconds. Creating the connection needs to be done by someone with administrative access to the Office 365 tenant, but all they need to do is press the connect button, and after that we don't need that person to administer this connection anymore. We also absolutely do not require the creation of a service account. Right? We don't want passwords. We don't want your passwords. It wouldn't be right if we did. So we can do everything that we need to do, get access to the APIs through the connection that is created here. In the case of Office 365, the connection takes the form of an Azure AD application, and then we use that application to be able to call the APIs. When we create this what we call a platform connection, so here the type of this is Office 365, that connection can be created in a few different modes. So we can choose between active control and observe only mode. The difference is that in observe only mode, Torsion will watch everything, we will see everything, and provide the kind of reporting functionality, see who has access, issue detection. We can do all of that kind of stuff, but we will not change anything in the host system. So the the security rules to automatically control access, that'll be disabled because that would require us to actually change something, so we don't. Or when an issue is detected, it will always have to be flagged to an administrator, right? We can't automatically fix something because that would require us to change something. So in observe only mode, the functionality is pared back a little bit so that we see everything but we don't change anything. Or of course you can set it in active control. And also because it is usually a good idea to not roll out IT technology in a big bang kind of way, but we want to do it gradually and carefully. So we can make that decision between observe only and active control. We can make that on a per site collection or a per Microsoft team basis, right? So on day one, you would probably leave all of your site collections to no connection except just one. You might turn to observe only or active control and roll this out gradually. To tie in also with a gradual rollout, we also have pilot mode here. So this is where you can create a specific list of the people who are in your pilot, and only the people on that list will see the modifications that we make to the user interface. Right? All other users who are not in the pilot group won't see any changes whatsoever. So we can handle that kind of gradual rollout. Here we can see who are our users. Right, so these are all of the users of the information system. These are all our users in Office 365 and all of the systems that Torsion is connected to. And we have some pretty powerful capabilities here. So we can look at some information about this user. So here are the attributes which describe this particular person. So this one's in the marketing department. They're in Montgomery City. The account assignments and so forth. We can see that we're actually getting this information from different places as well. So the department, our knowledge of what the department is coming from Azure AD, but our knowledge of what the account assignments are is coming from a spreadsheet. All right, so that means that, and we can see that over here, the user sources. There are two different sources of user attribute data. One is coming from Azure AD, and the other is coming from a spreadsheet. We're blending those two data sources together to build our knowledge of who the users are. We can also create what we call access profiles. Right? So this helps us with scenarios where people kind of have more than one role temporarily. If somebody goes on leave, somebody else is covering for them, then that person kind of has two jobs for a while, and so they now need access to additional stuff, but just temporarily. Well, here we can handle this. So all users will have a primary profile, right? This is data that we get from Azure AD and the data sources which describe them, and they will of course receive access to everything that they should have by virtue of that profile. But in addition, we can also create additional profiles. So we can see here, this user actually has another access profile. It's an administrative profile, and they're in addition to receiving access to everything by virtue of being in Montgomery and marketing a web developer. They are also receiving access to everything for anyone who's working on new rights, who's in Toulouse, in HR, and a webmaster. Right, so we can actually create these additional profiles for our users and manage them on a temporary basis. So here we can create a profile for this user, and additionally give them access to everything if they were in Surrey, who in the role of risk manager in the HR department, for example. We can say, well, why are we doing this? Maybe it's holiday cover. We can have a start date and an end date for this particular profile. So it's going to start on this date and end on the end of the month. So that means on the end of this month, everything that they are temporarily receiving access to by virtue of this additional temporary role that they're also doing will automatically be pulled out. And we can control how aggressively it's pulled out as well. So the access to K idea we talked about earlier, we can so when the profile ends, we can rapidly decay their access over 2 weeks, slowly over 2 months, so we can immediately revoke it. Right, so we're in control of how quickly that access is backed out. Another thing that's useful here we can do is suspend their access. So sometimes we have problems with our staff, right? Somebody goes on gardening leave, or there's a problem with someone's employment, or this kind of use case. Now what do we do when there's a problem with something? Let's say there's a problem with Abigail, or even if it's not really a problem, maybe she's just going on leave for 2 weeks, and we want to instigate a policy that means we don't want people accessing information when they're on holiday. So what we can do, normally if that was the requirement, we would have to suspend their entire AD account. Right, we'd have to suspend their whole account, which is a very heavy-handed thing to do. It shuts off their access to email, sometimes to the building. It's probably more heavy-handed than we would usually like in certain scenarios. What we can do here is just temporarily suspend their access to information. What this will do is Torsion will go through, and every group membership will pull them out. Every individual sharing we will undo and remove it. But we will remember where they all were. And then when that suspension ends, right, that could end automatically on a timer, or indeed we could come in here and admin could say to end the suspension, and then all of those individual configurations will go through and put them all back where they were. That could be tens of thousands of configurations, right? Lots and lots of different group memberships, individual accesses and sharings all over the place, right? That could be tens of thousands of them across multiple systems, across an entire organization. That could be lots and lots of them. We will just go through and put them all back. Right, we remember where they were, so we're now effectively suspending somebody's access temporarily. You could think of this as something like in our email, in our Outlook, we can set an out of office reply when we go on holiday. Well, this is kind of like an out of office reply, but for somebody's access to business information. Right, this can be very, very powerful for organizations that have a lot of sensitive information and want to be really concerned with this. Another thing we can do here is we can run a report. Right, so we spoke before about our ability to run a report on access to an information resource. So who has access to a file or a site or a team. Well, we can also run a report on what does a person have access to. So here we're going to generate a report which literally lists every resource that Abigail has access to. It's obviously going to be a long list. But that's okay. That's one of the reasons that all of our reports are actually generated as Excel files, because Excel is obviously a pretty powerful data source in its own right, and it gives us all of the kind of filtering and sorting capabilities that we might want to deal with big lists. And also, Excel data sources can be used as data sources for analysis cubes and other kinds of things if we want to build on this. So here we've just run a report on this person. Here's the person, the role, they're not external, user identifiers, their profiles, but here is all of their accessible resources. Here is a list of everything that this person has access to. Now this is going to go on for pages and pages. It's a big long list, but this is Excel, so we want to see, well, just what the files that they have access to. Then we can filter that down here, and filter, turn on the filters, right? So just what are the folders that this person has access to, and there we go. Right, so we've now done that, created that visibility quite quickly. Now, one of the use cases that a list like this might be useful for is what we described earlier. Maybe there's a problem with this person's employment, and we want to know what they have access to. Now, looking at a big long list in a spreadsheet with hundreds or thousands of items in it, sure, that's one way. But another way, which is sometimes a little more appropriate for the circumstance, is what we can do here. So here we saw the information estate earlier. Well, here we can also highlight access. So this will just allow us to quickly highlight what does that person have access to. Right, so there's the person where there's a problem. Hit OK, and we'll light it up. Right, so we can see this person has access to this site, but not this one. They have access to that library. There's more stuff down here. Right, so we can now just quickly at a glance see what they have access to, which is kind of a bit more powerful or a bit more useful in certain circumstances. Now, the last thing that we're going to show you in this demo, obviously there's a lot more to the tool. So for example, this is where we set up the security rule dimensions, role department and so forth, and how they are linked to the data sources. Also the classifications that are set up here, right? So we create these classifications, we create the policies that are attached to them, where those policies are published, blacklist and whitelist policies and lots of different things, how this works with DLP. This stuff does get quite involved, and we're not going to try and cover that entire depth of detail today. But the last thing that I'm going to show you here is around our capabilities for data access governance. So we talked right at the start about how Torsion can automatically figure out who owns everything. We call this information resource ownership, and we can administer that here. So here's the Oakshore site that we were looking at before, there's no business owner on the customer services site, but there is on the finance side, and that kind of stuff. We can see it and we can administer it there. But in addition, we also have this idea of what we call security certification campaigns. So here's the use case. This is a compliance use case. So we have an administrator sitting next to us. An auditor sitting next to us. He is demanding that we prove to him that the business is in control of who has access to the sensitive information in a SharePoint site. Right, so as we talked about before, just showing him a list of names, that's not proof, that's just a list of names. But with Torsion, we can be a lot more clever than that. We're a lot more capable. So as we saw earlier, we obviously do know who has access to this finance site. We have the see who has access capability here. We can see this at a glance. So here are the people who have access. We know who has access. We know why they have access. We know who gave it to them and when. We can go through and we can see every reason for access here, and we can demonstrate to the auditor that each of these reasons are true. So we're now getting pretty close to proving that we're in control, but we feel that we need to go a bit further. With this capability here, we call this security certifications campaigns. And here's how this works. So I'm going to create a campaign here. I'm going to call it Demo 1. It's going to start on this date, have a duration 30 days, and we're going to run this biannually. We're going to include in the scope of our campaign, I'm going to include all of these site collections here. Hit OK, and we're going to create that campaign here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to ask all of the business owners of the information in all of the areas of in all of the places which we've just included in the scope of our campaign. We're going to ask the data owners in the business to certify that they believe that who has access to their information is correct and appropriate. We're going to ask them this on a regular basis, and this is all going to happen completely automatically. So I'm just going to come back over to this finance site. Now I'm logged in as the owner of this particular site, and we will get a notification. And there it is. So there is an outstanding security certification for the site finance. Now, I don't have to look at it straight away. I could hit the snooze button. We saw earlier that the duration of this campaign was set to 30 days, which means it's not urgent right now, right? If I don't do anything about this for a week, it's actually not going to have any impact whatsoever. And maybe I'm busy right now, so I'll just hit the snooze button. The closer it gets to that due date, the more assertive that the Torsion's notifications are going to be. We might on day 1 we might just send you a notification like this, but on day 25 we might send you a notification like this, plus send you a chat message through a chatbot in Teams, and then on day 28 we might also send you an email. Right, we'll get more and more assertive the more urgent the issue is, but right now it's not particularly urgent. Okay, so we can hit open and take a look at the security certification. Now, what we're really asking of the data owner in the business here is pretty simple. All we really need them to do is either hit certify or reject. Right? It's very, very simple for them. Now, we're showing them here, first of all, just a bit of high-level information about the site, remembering, of course, that whenever there are problems, it's the data owner that we're telling them about, right? It's the data owner that is being engaged in kind of an ongoing way whenever there's a problem with the site. And as a result of that ongoing engagement, the data owner will often have a pretty good idea of what's going on in here, and already be pretty close to a place where they can confidently certify or reject the certification. Right, so all we really need them to do is hit the certify button, yes, I'm sure, and that's that. Now if they want a bit more information, there's a bit of a detailed view here. So you can see, here's the overview, who's the owner, what's the status, classification, what are the issues going on. They can address the issues right here. They can hit address issue. They can see what's changed in the site since the last time that they certified it. Bunch of changes in there. See the configuration up here. Also there's the so these are the different resources in the site that define their own security configurations. So there's a couple of libraries here that define their own permissions. Perhaps they want to might say, look, to correct this library should actually re-inherit its permissions. So they can do that here. If they do go ahead and re-inherit, then the following 6 people will lose access. The following 19 people will gain it. They can go ahead and inherit or not. But ultimately, all we are asking the data owner to do is to certify or reject. Now, if there is a problem that they don't feel they can fix, then they're not comfortable certifying, they can hit reject. What we'll do here is we'll just ask them, okay, what's wrong? Enter some comments. This is going to kick off a workflow that's going to go back and forth between the data owner and the administrator. So the administrator can engage, help to resolve the problem. Once they've fixed it, they'll resubmit it for certification and it'll come back to the data owner in the business. And we'll go round and round until ultimately the data owner feels confident in certifying it. So they can hit yes, I'm sure, and that's it, right? Their job is done. Now, returning for a moment to the use case where we started, right? The use case, of course, was there's an auditor sitting next to us saying, prove to us that the business is in control of who has access to sensitive information. Well, let's recap what we're doing now. We have perfect visibility of who has access, who gave it to them, and when. For every person who has access, we not only understand who they are, but why they have access. We can go reason by reason and demonstrate that those reasons are true and that access is appropriate. We're also engaging the data owners on a regular basis for them to certify access. We are now in control, right? It's pretty hard to argue that the business still is not in control of this. We are now in control, and the only thing left to do is prove it. So here's how we do that, right? The auditor says, prove that you're in control of who has access to that site. We're running this certification. We're doing this campaign on a regular basis. We can run a report against that particular certification. Here it is. That report is generated automatically, instantaneously. Open the report in Excel. So there's the report. Right, so we're running this report at this time. These were the certifications involved. This was the results of the different certifications, right? So this object was certified, certifications in here, assigned, here's the results, here's the date times. They can see that all of this stuff is ongoing, right? It just becomes part of the woodwork of how the business operates day to day, how it works and lives with its information day to day. This is not something that is just done scrambling before an auditor turns up. It's just constantly ongoing. And as a result, that is going to be a categorical tick in the box for the auditor who is requiring proof that the business is in control of who has access to this information. Okay, so we're going to leave the demo there. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We do hope you enjoy what you see, and you can imagine plenty of usages for it in the organizations that you work with. Next steps, please do feel free to get in touch through our website or through your channel partners or directly with us, and we'll be very eager to speak with you and talk about how we can apply Torsion in your organizations to help you get control of who has access to what, and offset those security and compliance challenges that we've been grappling with as an industry for so long. Thanks very much, and we'll see you later.